Hi, my name's Sarah, and I'm back with another video in our trans allyship series. Today we're going to be talking about transgender youth. So to start off with this, there's a lot of misconceptions when we're talking about children and gender identity. There's a lot of thoughts around the fact that, well, kids are so young, they're too young to understand something like gender or if they're transgender. And that's not necessarily the case. So, a lot of what we know from the literature shows us that children are far more perceptive to gender than we really give them credit for. Children as early as 18 months are aware of gender characteristics, and by age 3, most children are able to categorize their own gender. They're able to recognize, oh, I'm a boy, I'm a girl, I'm not really sure where I'm at. And it's common for children of all genders to explore gender expression. So, this isn't just something when we're talking about trans youth, it's important to understand that to a certain degree, all of us when we're little explore gender, whether that's exploring different genders than what we were assigned, exploring different aspects of our own. You may not be able to tell completely if your child is trans right away, just because, as I said, this exploration is really normal. And especially if they are very young while they're exploring this and they might not have a lot of the language that we as adults have, but that does not mean that you're not supposed to be supportive. In fact, children of all identities who are raised in gender affirming households show increased mental health. So, whether it's being supportive specifically of a child that is transitioning or just supportive of a child exploring what does my gender mean? How do I want to express my gender? This is all related to lower rates of anxiety, depression, lower rates of substance abuse later in life, and that's in comparison to children that are raised in less affirming households where we see more of those rates of anxiety, depression, and other mental health concerns. While some people believe that people need to be adults to truly understand if they're transgender, there's a lot of literature saying that kids are just as aware as they grow. There's a lot of that exploration that they are able to do even before they even hit puberty. It's the job of parents and other adults in children's lives to support gender expression rather than try to oppress it. Trying to convince children that they're too young to question their assigned gender is what contributes to poor mental health outcomes, like I mentioned before. One helpful rule of thumb when you are trying to kind of maybe understand more if your child may be gender diverse is consistent, insistent, persistent. So, what I mean by this is if your child is consistently expressing that they are a specific gender. So, say a child that was assigned female at birth is consistently making comments of, oh, I'm a boy, I want to play with the other boys, I want to play with the boy toys, I want to do all of these things that are boy, that might be a sign that their gender might be more aligned with a masculine gender. Insistent is similar with consistent, consistent being about frequency. Insistent is more of kind of getting that pushback from a child of when you might say something like, oh, why don't you go sit with all the other girls? Your child might say something like, but I'm not a girl, and kind of having that pushback and having that come up here and there. Maybe it's not always aggressive, but maybe it's kind of like correcting you when you say something that might indicate a different gender than how they're identifying. And persistent. So this is, again, a lot of these have a lot of overlap, but this is kind of over time, not just the frequency, but like the persistence of this is my gender, this is my gender, this is my gender. Once you're starting to see a child kind of plateauing on that of persisting consistently, insistently saying that this is how I identify or I identify as things other than this, that might be start to give you an inclination that they might be gender diverse. So beyond just recognizing and understanding how gender is presenting in children, there's also the importance just of how we talk about gender with kids. So when we're talking about themes around gender and honestly anything that might be these kind of like bigger picture value systems, it's important to know that kids can understand big concepts. They just might not have the right vocabulary. So it's less of trying to shield a child from a certain topic or trying to avoid certain topics and more of translating that. Thinking of how do I explain this in more simplified terms. So an example of this might be a child might not know exactly what the word non-binary means, But that doesn't mean you can't explain that concept to a child. Maybe it sounds a lot more in kind of like simplified terms of a lot of people are boys and girls, but some people don't really feel like they're a boy or a girl. That kind of language that has these simple words that children will understand. Kids oftentimes try to make sense of the world also by conceptualizing rules, and this can be something that's a little tricky to navigate when you're around little kids, especially the younger ones, as they really kind of see the world in terms of these are the rules that everything follows. So these kind of like prescribed rules, like all girls like pink or boys don't have long hair, might be things that children really stick to, really point to. And if you are hearing your child say these things, it's important not to either endorse them, of course, and also not to be judgmental. Show interest when your child is talking about these things and make it more of kind of helping them think about it more deeply. So, like asking them questions as opposed to saying, like, oh, that's not how it is, or yes, that is how it is. Maybe if your child is like on this topic of like, oh, boys don't have short hair, maybe it's something like, yeah, you know, your uncle is a boy and his hair is kind of long. Maybe some boys do have long hair. Kind of offering things like that, or maybe just asking, like, why do you think that? Where does that thought come from? Really giving them the space to kind of understand as opposed to trying to enforce, like, no, this is how it is. Find ways also when you're speaking both to children and around children to use gender inclusive language. I know we've talked about it here and there in the other videos in the series, and this kind of goes to something that's important to know with child development, that kids learn more by observing than they do what they're actively taught. So a child is learning so much more of like seeing and hearing and interacting, as opposed to when you sit them down and say, this is what you're supposed to do, this is what you're supposed to say, those really lined out things. So when they see an adult using gender inclusive language, that's how they're going to start speaking. That's how they're going to start interacting with the world. Avoid reinforcing gender roles in conversations and actions. So similar to that aspect of inclusive language, if you are showing this reinforcement of gender roles, if you are saying messages that really feed into gender as a binary, gender is something concrete like that, a child is going to start internalizing that. So when you're looking at a doll at the store, for example, don't jump into your son to say that's only for girls. Allow your child to show interest in things outside of their assigned gender, and let them have that space to explore. This can also be a point in time to kind of look inward and challenge your own assumptions about gender. How do I interact with gender? How do I interact with my gender? These are all important in kind of answering those questions that can lead us to be more helpful gender allies to children. Another really important thing to do when we're teaching children of all genders about gender is to expose them to different expressions, expose them to diverse representation of gender. So whether that's reading books with gender diversity, watching movies, telling stories where gender roles are not adhered to, and where gender diversity is present, anything along those lines. Show children examples that gender is not these concrete kind of boxes that we might be told initially. So when we're looking beyond understanding, beyond teaching, looking at how to support trans youth and non-binary youth specifically, there's kind of two angles to look from. For parents and loved ones that kind of have a direct relationship with a trans youth, as mentioned before, be affirming. It's so important to have that affirmation from someone they look up to, from someone as an adult, an authority figure in their life. Show that you believe them and love them just the same. While we should do this for all trans folks, of course, it's important to recognize that trans youth are at a really critical age in terms of self-esteem and identity development. We know that this is a very fragile time when it comes to developing mental health as well. And we also know that studies in this area show that if a trans youth has at least one affirming adult, they are 40% less likely to report suicidal behavior. So even if you can be just the one adult in their life, that can make a huge difference in their mental health. Using the correct name and pronouns that they ask to be called by is really critical. It's one of those kind of basic building blocks of respect. Being flexible in this area is also really important for children because they might still be in that exploration phase. They may not have a set pronoun that is going to be their pronoun for the whole year or even for the whole month. Let them try on different hats. Let them try and see what fits better and be accommodating and understanding if that changes. Remember how to make mistakes from our previous videos, of course. The whole stop in the middle of your sentence, apologize, correct. Making it simple, smooth, she, sorry, I meant they, and then going across with it. As adults with power, it's also our role to help connect youth with resources they need. This can be a spot where it's really important for us individually to familiarize ourselves with organizations, resources in the community, so that we may be able to connect the child to what they may need. So on that subject, going to how we can be supportive to our community, how we can support trans youth that might not be ones that we're directly involved with, directly engaging with. So one big possibility is volunteering or even just donating to organizations in your local community or even in a national setting that support LGBTQ plus youth. Look at what's around. If you live in Chicago, looking at the different resources that might be around in Chicago. Advocate for inclusive practices in your community, especially in your child's school. If you are a parent or you work in a school setting, that can be a great place to be an advocate, whether you're involved with a PTA, if you're on a school board. We know right now there's a lot of kind of debates coming into schools around how gender should be spoken about and how we should interact with gender in the school setting. You can really have direct action by being involved with your child's school. And beyond those direct ways that you can be engaging, interacting, you can also just focus on educating yourself around gender and other topics related to identity. This might be attending workshops, reading books by scholars in the area, or just prominent voices around gender and identity, and watching educational videos like this one. Even if you don't currently know of any trans or non-binary children in your life, educating yourself and others helps to establish communities that understand and support our children regardless of their gender. So when talking about gender with children, as I've said throughout the video, it's important that we address any biases or misconceptions we may have been taught. Educating ourselves and looking inward are the first steps to being able to model gender inclusivity behaviors to those looking up to us. If you are an adult that's caring for an LGBTQ plus child, whether they're trans or any other identity within the umbrella, a really great organization to get to know and maybe get involved with is PFLAG. So PFLAG. This is an organization comprised specifically of loving family and friends that want to be allies to the community, especially youth in the community. This group was actually started by a mother of a really prominent gay activist that wanted to show her support and create this space for families to get involved with the movement. So if you're curious to learn more about PFLAG or any other similar resources, you can visit their website at pflag.org. So in our final video, we are going to close up by discussing gender dysphoria and what it means to be gender euphoric. So I will see you then. I hope you have a great day.